The moon hung low over the northern Cascades, its silver light bleeding through dark clouds like a blade. Morgan Vale ran through the forest, breath coming in sharp bursts that crystallized in the cold night air. Behind her, the distant howls of hunters echoed through the pines. Her heart hammered against her ribs as pine needles crunched beneath her desperate footfalls. 7 years had passed since the execution of her father, branded a traitor to the wolf clans. 7 years of hiding, of changing names, of sleeping with one eye open. Tonight, that fragile existence threatened to shatter completely. The Moonfall festival approached. Once a year, the unmated wolves gathered under the silver light, where alphas could claim those without protection. For Morgan, the lone wolf with no pack, no family, no allies, it meant becoming property. A vessel, a possession. Her muscles burned as she pushed through the underbrush. The lights of Silver Lake Castle glimmered in the distance, promising safety and danger in equal measure. The festival would provide cover, anonymity in the crowd. If she could slip in unnoticed, perhaps she could evade both the hunters and the claiming ritual. A root caught her foot. Morgan tumbled forward, a cry escaping her lips as she crashed to the forest floor. Pain shot through her ankle. The howls grew closer. Her fingers dug into the dirt as she tried to stand, only to collapse back down. "This is how it ends," she whispered to the indifferent trees. A shadow moved between the pines. Morgan froze, breath caught in her throat. The figure approached slowly, deliberately. Not the frantic pace of a hunter, but the measured steps of something else entirely. Something more dangerous. "Be still," a voice commanded, deep and weathered like old leather. An older man emerged from the darkness. His silver hair gleamed in the moonlight, face lined with years of experience. Eyes that had seen too much studied her cautiously. "They're coming," Morgan warned, trying again to stand. "I know." He moved with surprising speed for his age, kneeling beside her. "William Rivers," he introduced himself, simply examining her ankle with practiced hands. "I don't need your name," Morgan hissed. "I need to run." William's eyes, sharp and intelligent, met hers. "Running hasn't served you well so far, has it, daughter of Thomas Vale?" Morgan went rigid. No one had called her by her true name in years. "How did you—" "There's no time." He pulled her to her feet, supporting her weight. "The castle is still a mile away. You'll never make it alone." "Why help me?" Morgan searched his face for deception. Something like grief passed across his features. A promise made to a dead man. Before she could question him further, William guided her toward a hollow beneath an ancient oak. The space inside was larger than it appeared, lined with worn blankets and supplies. A hideout long established. "Stay silent," he instructed, covering the entrance with branches. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Morgan heard the hunters pass, their voices harsh. In the quiet forest, William remained completely still, not even his breathing betraying their position. Only when the sounds had long faded did he move again. "You knew my father." It wasn't a question. William's expression hardened. "I did." "You were there when they killed him." The old man turned away, retrieving a small pack from the corner of the hideout. "I was." "Then why help his daughter?" William paused, his shoulders bearing the weight of unspeakable memories. "Because everything they told you about Thomas Vale was a lie. He was no traitor." Morgan's breath caught. For 7 years, she'd carried the shame of her father's supposed betrayal alongside the grief of his loss. Then what was he? William faced her, his eyes reflecting the pain of someone who had seen too much. "He was the only one brave enough to stand against the corruption of the Alpha King, and I was too much of a coward to stand with him." He handed her the pack. Inside lay a carefully crafted mask, elegant and anonymous, perfect for the Moonfall festival. "Who are you, really?" Morgan pressed. The old man's lips curved in a bitter smile. "Once I was William Vale, your father's brother, royal advisor to the Alpha King. Now I'm just an old wolf trying to atone for past cowardice." Morgan stared at him, the uncle she'd never known existed, the blood family she thought long gone. "The festival begins at midnight," William explained. "You'll enter as my assistant. Watch, listen, and remain invisible. The castle holds secrets your father died protecting. Secrets that could either save our kind or destroy it completely." "I just want to survive the night," Morgan insisted. "No." William's voice carried the weight of certainty. "You came here because fate demanded it. Because the Moonfire in your blood calls you to a greater purpose." "Moonfire." The words sent an inexplicable chill down Morgan's spine. William took her hand, turning her wrist to reveal a birthmark she'd carried all her life, a crescent moon barely visible against her pale skin. You are the last of the Vale line, the last to carry the true power of the moon. His eyes grew distant. For 7 years I've waited, watching from the shadows, preparing for your return. I don't understand. You will. William pressed the mask into her hands. Tonight you must dance with danger, learn the faces of our enemies, and perhaps meet your destiny. The next few hours passed in careful preparation. William taught Morgan the protocols of the festival, the proper etiquette, the safe passages through the castle. Most importantly, he taught her patience. Observe before acting. He counseled adjusting the silver pin that would hold her disguise in place. The young rush in with fang and claw. The wise wait for the perfect moment to strike. Morgan absorbed his teachings, recognizing the wisdom earned through decades of survival. This man, this uncle she never knew existed, had spent years in hiding, waiting for a moment that might never come. Why now, she asked finally. Why risk everything after all this time? William's eyes darkened. Because Alexander Blackwood, the Alpha King who condemned your father, is weakening. The power structure shifts, and in that chaos lies our opportunity. Morgan felt cold dread pool in her stomach. Alexander Blackwood, the same king who ordered my father's execution, the very same. William's voice dropped to barely a whisper. The king whose secret could bring the entire kingdom crashing down. As night fell completely, they made their way toward the towering castle. Silver Lake glimmered below them, reflecting the full moon in its still waters. Music drifted through the air, along with the scent of food wine and the distinctive musk of hundreds of wolves gathered in human form. Remember, William cautioned as they approached the servants' entrance, you are no one tonight, a shadow, a whisper. Watch everything react to nothing. Morgan nodded, settling the mask over her features. The weight of it felt strangely comforting, a barrier between her true self and the dangerous world she was about to enter. And if I'm discovered, she asked. William's expression grew grave. Then seek the Moonstone Chamber beneath the Eastern Tower. It's where your father and I once... He hesitated, pain flashing across his weathered features. Just remember, if all else fails, the moon will guide you. With those cryptic words, they entered the castle. William led her through narrow corridors, bypassing the main halls, where guests arrived in their finery. Instead, they slipped into the shadows of the grand ballroom, where Morgan could observe unnoticed. The sight took her breath away. Hundreds of wolves from every territory gathered under crystal chandeliers, their formal attire a stark contrast to the primal energy that vibrated beneath the surface. Nobles from the northern packs, their insignias gleaming silver and blue. Delegates from the eastern mountains adorned in gold and amber. The western coast representatives elegant in sea green and pearl. And watching over them all from his elevated throne sat Alexander Blackwood, the Alpha King. Even from a distance, his presence commanded attention. Tall, imposing, his black formal attire accented with silver that caught the light with every movement. His mask was simple but elegant, covering the upper portion of his face, leaving visible only his strong jaw and the hint of a mouth that seemed unaccustomed to smiling. The monster who killed my father, Morgan whispered. William's hand tightened on her arm in warning. Careful, these walls have ears. For hours, Morgan observed from the shadows, fetching drinks when necessary to maintain her cover, but mostly watching, learning. The nobles competed for the king's attention, their false laughter and calculated movements, a dance of politics and power. Midnight approached. The music shifted, becoming more primal, more insistent. The atmosphere in the ballroom changed, charged with anticipation. It's beginning, William murmured, suddenly tense. The claiming ceremony. You should return to our quarters. But before Morgan could retreat, horns blared from the center of the hall. The music stopped. All eyes turned to the Alpha King as he rose from his throne. The moon reaches its zenith. Alexander announced, his voice deep and commanding. Let those unclaimed present themselves. Young women and men, their masks marking them as unattached, moved reluctantly to the center of the ballroom. Some looked frightened, others resigned. A few seemed eager, hoping to catch the attention of powerful suitors. Morgan pressed deeper into the shadows, heart pounding. This was what she had come to avoid. Being paraded, examined, claimed like property. I should go, she whispered to William. but as she turned to leave, disaster struck. A servant carrying a tray of wine glasses bumped into her, sending crystals shattering across the marble floor. All eyes turned toward the commotion, including those of the Alpha King. For one terrible moment, silence filled the hall. Morgan stood frozen, exposed, her mask suddenly feeling paper-thin. William stepped forward, bowing deeply. "Forgive my assistant's clumsiness, Your Majesty." But Alexander Blackwood had already descended the dais, moving through the crowd with predatory grace. The nobles parted before him, murmuring in confusion and speculation. Morgan felt the urge to run, but William's earlier lessons held her in place. Running would only confirm suspicion. She lowered her gaze, hoping the king would simply pass by. He didn't. Alexander stopped before her, towering over her slight frame. Up close, his presence was overwhelming, a storm contained in human form. His scent carried hints of cedar and rain, ancient forests after lightning strikes. "Look at me," he commanded softly. Morgan raised her eyes, meeting his gaze through the slits of their respective masks. The king's eyes were amber, almost gold in the candlelight, studying her with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "You're new to my court." He observed his tone, making it clear this wasn't a question. Morgan bobbed a curtsy, praying her voice wouldn't betray her. "Yes, Your Majesty, I only arrived today." Something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Confusion before Morgan could determine which. Alexander extended his hand. "Dance with me." The room collectively gasped. The Alpha King never danced during the claiming ceremony, never participated at all beyond officiating. William stepped forward, alarm evident in his posture. "Your Majesty, she's merely a servant girl, untrained in court dances." Alexander's gaze never left Morgan's face. "Then she'll learn." It wasn't a request. Morgan placed her trembling hand in his, feeling immediately the strength that could snap her bones with minimal effort. His skin burned against hers, unnaturally warm. As he led her to the center of the ballroom, whispers erupted around them. The music resumed, hesitant at first, then swelling to fill the tense silence. "You move like someone hunted," Alexander murmured as they began to dance, his hand at her waist, guiding her through steps she'd never learned but somehow followed. "Like someone who expects danger at every turn." Morgan kept her expression neutral. "I'm merely nervous in such distinguished company, Your Majesty." His lips curved slightly. "And yet you lie with remarkable composure." Her heart stuttered. "I don't—" "Shh." His grip tightened fractionally. "Your secret is safe for the moment, but I'm curious what brings a lone wolf to my castle on the night of the claiming ceremony, especially one trying so desperately to hide." They turned Morgan's dress, flaring around her ankles. The crowd watched, enthralled by the unexpected spectacle of their king dancing with an unknown servant. "I seek only to remain unclaimed," she admitted, deciding a partial truth might be safer than a complete lie. Alexander's expression darkened. "There are easier ways to avoid the ceremony than infiltrating my castle. None that guaranteed safety." His eyes narrowed, studying her face with uncomfortable intensity. "Your scent." He began, then stopped abruptly. His nostrils flared slightly. "It reminds me of someone I once knew." Morgan's blood turned to ice. Had he recognized her? Did he somehow know she was Thomas Vale's daughter? She missed a step, nearly stumbling. Alexander steadied her effortlessly. Careful, he warned, though whether he meant her dancing or her situation remained unclear. The music reached its crescendo. As the final notes hung in the air, Alexander leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "When the second horn sounds, run to the eastern corridor," he whispered. "Do not hesitate." Before Morgan could process this strange command, the Alpha King straightened and stepped back, releasing her hand with formal courtesy. "Thank you for the dance," he announced loudly for the benefit of the watching crowd. Then he turned and strode back to his throne, leaving Morgan standing alone in the center of the ballroom, confused and terrified. She retreated quickly to where William waited, his face ashen. "What did he say to you?" the old wolf demanded, once they were somewhat private. "He told me to run to the eastern corridor when the second horn sounds," Morgan whispered. "Why would he—" The first horn blared, cutting off her question. The claiming ceremony was officially beginning. William's eyes widened in alarm. "We need to leave now." But they had barely taken 3 steps when Alexander's voice rang out again, stopping all movement in the hall. "By ancient right of the Alpha bloodline, I invoke the first claim." The crowd gasped. The first claim was the Alpha King's privilege to choose before any other wolf, a tradition rarely exercised in modern times. Alexander rose, his figure commanding attention, his eyes finding Morgan's across the crowded room. "I claim the servant girl who danced with me." Chaos erupted. Nobles whispered frantically. Guards moved to block exits. William cursed under his breath, grabbing Morgan's arm. "Eastern Corridor," he hissed. "He's giving you a chance to escape." "Why would he do that?" Morgan demanded. "I don't know, but it's our only hope." The second horn sounded. With a surge of desperate courage, Morgan broke free of William's grip and ran. Guards shouted, nobles gasped, but she kept moving, weaving through the stunned crowd toward the eastern side of the castle. Behind her, more chaos erupted. She heard William's voice rising above the din, creating a diversion. Tears stung her eyes at the thought of him sacrificing himself for her escape, but she didn't slow down. The eastern corridor stretched before her, dimly lit and deserted. Morgan's footsteps echoed against stone as she ran, heart pounding in her ears. At the end of the hallway stood a simple wooden door, unremarkable, except for the faint silver glow emanating from beneath it. Without hesitation, Morgan pushed through, finding herself in a circular chamber. Moonlight streamed through a glass dome overhead, illuminating a single stone pedestal in the center. Upon it rested a glowing crystal, the moonstone William had mentioned. The door slammed shut behind her. Morgan whirled around, coming face to face with Alexander Blackwood. He had removed his mask, revealing aristocratic features set in a grim expression. "I knew it," he said softly. "The moment I caught your scent. Vale blood." Morgan backed away, her shoulder blades pressing against cold stone. "If you're going to kill me like you killed my father, get on with it." Alexander's expression flickered with something that might have been regret. "Is that what you think happened? That I killed Thomas Vale? Didn't you?" Wow. He moved further into the chamber, the moonlight casting sharp shadows across his face. "Your father was executed for treason against the wolf clans, but not by my hand. You're the Alpha King. It happened under your rule." "I was barely 20, newly crowned after my father's death," Alexander countered. "The council made the decision. I merely—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I failed to stop it." Morgan scoffed. "And that absolves you?" "No." The single word hung between them, heavy with admission. "Nothing absolves any of us." He approached the moonstone, its light reflecting in his amber eyes. "Do you know what this is?" "A rock that glows," Morgan replied tersely. A hint of amusement crossed Alexander's features. "It's the heart of our kind, the physical manifestation of the connection between wolves and the moon." He gestured for her to come closer. "Touch it." "Why should I trust you?" "Because I'm currently committing treason by showing it to you," he replied bluntly. "Because I've spent 7 years searching for Thomas Vale's child. Because the council would have me executed if they knew you were here." Against her better judgment, curiosity drew Morgan forward. The moonstone pulsed with inner light, seeming to beat in rhythm with her heart. Hesitantly, she extended her hand. The moment her fingers touched the crystal, pain lanced through her. Visions flooded her mind. Her father standing before a council, his voice raised in warning. A younger Alexander watching in horror as the execution order was passed. William turning away, unable to bear witness. And beneath it all, a current of power, ancient and wild, flowing through bloodlines across generations. Morgan staggered back, gasping. The birthmark on her wrist burned, glowing with the same silver light as the stone. Alexander steadied her, his touch gentler than she expected. "Now you understand." "No," she breathed. "I don't understand any of this." A commotion outside the door interrupted them. Voices shouted, boots pounded against stone. "The council has realized what's happening," Alexander said grimly. "They're coming for you." "Why?" Morgan demanded. "What do they want from me?" Alexander's expression hardened. "The same thing they wanted from your father." Silence. He moved to a hidden panel in the wall, pressing it to reveal a narrow passage. "This leads to the servants' quarters. Find William. He'll get you to safety." "You're helping me escape," Morgan couldn't hide her disbelief. "I'm trying to right a wrong that began before either of us was born." Alexander's gaze held hers. "The council has been corrupted for generations. Your father discovered the truth and it cost him his life." The shouting grew louder. The door to the chamber shuddered under heavy impact. "Go," Alexander urged. But know this, you'll never be truly safe until you complete what your father started. Which is what exactly, M.O.? Alexander's answer was cut short as the door splintered. Guards burst in, led by an elderly man with cold eyes of Victor Stern, head of the council. Caesar, Victor commanded. Alexander moved in front of Morgan. Stand down. She's under my protection. Protection, Victor's voice dripped with disdain. She's the daughter of a traitor. Her blood is tainted with the curse. The only curse here is the lies you've fed our people for generations, Alexander retorted. Victor's eyes narrowed. Careful, Your Majesty. Even kings can be replaced. The guards hesitated, caught between conflicting authorities. In the moment of confusion, William appeared behind them, his aged frame suddenly vital with purpose. Morgan, he called. The trial of Moon's truth, invoke your right, understanding dawned on Victor's face, followed by fear. Silence him. But Morgan had already stepped forward, the words coming to her as if from ancestral memory. By blood and by right, I demand the trial of Moon's truth. The chamber fell silent. Even Victor couldn't deny this ancient claim, a right afforded to any wolf accused of betrayal against the clans. Alexander's expression shifted to grudging respect. The trial will be held at dawn, he declared. Until then, she remains unharmed. As guards escorted her from the chamber, Morgan caught William's eye. The old wolf nodded once, a gesture of approval and pride. For the first time in 7 years of running, Morgan Vale stood her ground. Whatever secrets lay buried in her bloodline, whatever truth her father died protecting, she would face it head on. The time for hiding was over. In the heart of her enemy's castle, surrounded by those who wished her dead, Morgan had found something unexpected, the beginnings of her own power. Not just the mysterious Moonfire that apparently ran through her veins, but the strength to confront her fate instead of fleeing from it. Dawn would bring the trial, and with it, the truth that had been buried for far too long. Dawn broke over Silver Lake Castle, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. The ancient stone fortress stood silhouetted against this fiery backdrop, its towers piercing the heavens like accusing fingers. Within those walls, Morgan Vale prepared for a trial that would determine not only her fate, but possibly the future of all wolf clans. Her cell was sparse but not cruel, a simple chamber high in the eastern tower. The morning light streamed through narrow windows, casting long shadows across the stone floor. Morgan paced her bare feet silent against the cold surface. Sleep had eluded her through the night, her mind racing with revelations and questions. The door opened without warning. William stood there, his aged frame somehow more vital in daylight. Though his silver hair remained unkempt and his clothes worn, his eyes burned with fierce purpose. Behind him loomed 2 royal guards, their expressions carefully neutral. It's time, William said simply. Morgan nodded, squaring her shoulders. She wore a simple white dress provided for the trial, the fabric light against her skin. The garment's purity felt like mockery against the supposed curse in her blood. Will they execute me if I fail? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. William's expression softened momentarily. Focus on survival, not failure. The guards escorted them through winding corridors and down spiraling staircases. The castle stirred to life around them, servants hurrying with morning tasks, nobles gathering in hushed clusters. All eyes followed Morgan's passage, conversations dying, as she approached only to erupt again once she passed. They fear what they don't understand, William murmured. Remember that fear often masquerades as hatred. They descended deep beneath the castle foundations, the air growing cool and damp. Ancient torches lined walls carved directly from bedrock, illuminating runes that pulsed with faint silver light. Morgan felt a strange resonance with these symbols, as if they sang to something buried deep within her blood. The trial chamber opened before them, a perfect circle hewn from living stone. At its center stood a raised dais of polished moonstone that seemed to glow from within. The chamber's ceiling opened to the sky through a circular aperture, allowing the fading moonlight to pour directly onto the dais. Around the perimeter, tiered seating held the members of the High Council and noble representatives from each wolf clan. Victor Stern occupied the most prominent position, his aged face set in grim lines of disapproval. Beside him sat other elders, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Alexander Blackwood entered from a separate door, his regal bearing commanding immediate attention. He wore formal black attire with subtle silver embroidery, the crown of the Alpha King resting upon his brow. His amber eyes found Morgan's across the chamber, his expression unreadable. The trial of Moon's truth begins, intoned an elderly priest, his voice echoing throughout the chamber. Morgan Vale, daughter of Thomas Vale, stands accused of carrying cursed blood. She has invoked her ancestral right to trial by Moonfire. The crowd murmured. William squeezed Morgan's arm reassuringly before being directed to a seat apart from the proceedings. She stood alone now, vulnerable before the assembled power of the wolf clans. Step onto the dais, the priest instructed. Morgan moved forward, each step deliberate. The moonstone felt strangely warm beneath her bare feet. As she reached the center, a hush fell over the assembly. The trial is simple, the priest continued. The accused will be exposed to the direct light of the moon. If her blood is pure, the moon will bless her. If cursed, it will reveal the corruption within. Victor Stern rose from his seat. Let it be noted that the accused is the daughter of a confirmed traitor. Her father attempted to corrupt the royal bloodline with ancient forbidden magic. The same corruption likely flows through her veins. The trial will determine truth, not speculation. Alexander countered, his deep voice cutting through Victor's accusations. Proceed. The priest raised his hands. Silver bowls of burning herbs surrounded the dais, releasing sweet-smelling smoke that coiled around Morgan's ankles and rose toward the ceiling. The fading moonlight intensified suddenly, focusing like a physical palm upon her body. Pain lanced through Morgan, sharp electric primal. Her skin felt too tight, as though something beneath it struggled for release. Visions flashed before her eyes, her father with hands wreathed in silver flame, her mother screaming as shadows consumed her wolves, transforming into monstrous shapes beneath a blood-red moon. Morgan bit back a cry, determined not to show weakness. The moonlight seemed to penetrate her flesh, illuminating her veins with silver fire. The birthmark on her wrist burned white-hot, expanding in intricate patterns up her arm. The curse reveals itself, Victor called triumphantly. No, William shouted, rising from his seat. That's not curse marking. It's the ancient sigil of the Moonfire Guardians. Silence, the priest commanded. None may speak during the trial. But William moved forward, approaching the edge of the ceremonial circle. Morgan, listen to me. What you're experiencing isn't corruption, it's awakening. The Moonfire chose your bloodline as its protectors. Guards moved to restrain him, but William evaded them with surprising agility. Your father discovered the truth that the royal line was being manipulated by those who feared the Moonfire's true purpose. Restrain him, Victor ordered, face contorted with rage. The pain intensified. Morgan fell to her knees, silver light pouring from her eyes. Through the haze of agony, she saw William break past the guards and leap onto the dais beside her, an act strictly forbidden during the trial. Remember who you are, William whispered urgently. The Vale line doesn't carry a curse. It carries a legacy. The moment his hand touched her shoulder, the chamber erupted in chaos. The moonlight that had focused on Morgan expanded explosively, enveloping both her and William in a column of brilliant silver. Guards and council members shielded their eyes, some crying out in fear. Within that column of light, Morgan felt William's memories flow into her decades of knowledge, of secrets kept and truths hidden. She saw her father, as William had known him, brave, principled, determined to protect the wolf clans from corruption that had infiltrated their highest ranks. The council has been compromised for generations, William's voice echoed in her mind. Your father discovered that Victor and his allies were siphoning the power of the Moonfire for themselves, weakening the true bond between wolves and the moon. The vision shifted. Morgan saw her father confronting the previous Alpha King, Alexander's father, presenting evidence of the corruption. She witnessed the council's fury, their swift condemnation, the execution carried out before Alexander could intervene. They feared the Vale bloodline. William continued, his physical form beginning to fade within the light. Your ancestors were the original guardians of the Moonfire, chosen by the moon itself to maintain balance. That's why they called it a curse, to turn others against you. Morgan understood suddenly, horribly, what was happening. William, you're burning up in the Moonfire. You have to let go. His weathered face smiled through the pain. I've lived my years in shadow, hiding from what should have been my duty alongside your father. Let my final act be of service. The silver light intensified around William's form. His body began to dissolve into particles of luminous energy. Take what I know, what I am, he whispered. The bloodline memories are yours now. Use them wisely. With a final surge of light that momentarily blinded everyone in the chamber, William Vale ceased to exist as a physical being. The energy that had been his essence flowed into Morgan, carrying with it generations of knowledge and power that had been her birthright. The moonlight receded. Morgan remained kneeling on the dais, tears streaming down her cheeks. But something fundamental had changed. The pain was gone, replaced by a strange clarity. The silver patterns on her skin no longer burned, but shimmered with controlled energy. Slowly she rose to her feet. The chamber remained silent, the assembled wolves too stunned to speak. Even Victor appeared shaken, his earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty. "The trial is complete," the priest finally announced, his voice trembling. "The accused has survived the moon's judgment." Alexander stepped forward, his expression a complex mixture of awe and concern. "The council will adjourn to discuss these unexpected developments." "No," Morgan said, her voice carrying a newfound authority that surprised even herself. The knowledge William had sacrificed himself to give her flowed through her mind, providing certainty where there had been confusion. "There will be no adjournment. The trial of Moon's truth has revealed exactly what it was meant to reveal." She turned to face the council, the silver light still dancing beneath her skin. "For generations, the true purpose of the Moonfire has been hidden from our people. What you call a curse is actually our most sacred connection to the power that makes us what we are." Victor rose, anger overcoming his shock. "Guards, restrain her. This display of forbidden magic proves her corruption." But the guards hesitated, looking to Alexander instead. The Alpha King studied Morgan intently, then raised his hand for silence. "Let her speak," he commanded. "The trial has granted her that right." Morgan felt the weight of William's memories guiding her words. "7 years ago, my father discovered that members of this council had been corrupting the Moonfire ritual for their own gain. They were severing our people's true connection to the moon, weakening us generation by generation." She pointed directly at Victor. "He and his allies have been draining the power meant for all wolves, hoarding it to extend their lives and influence. That's why the claiming ritual exists, not to protect unmated wolves, but to control bloodlines that might threaten their power." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Some council members shifted uncomfortably, others looked outraged. "These are the desperate lies of a condemned woman," Victor snarled. "Your Majesty, I have served the crown faithfully for decades. Will you allow these baseless accusations?" Alexander remained silent, his gaze moving between Morgan and Victor. The tension in the chamber grew palpable. "If my accusations are baseless," Morgan continued, "then Victor won't object to undergoing the trial of Moon's truth himself." The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Victor's face drained of color. "That's absurd," he spluttered. "I am a council elder. My loyalty is beyond question." "Then you have nothing to fear from the Moon's judgment," Morgan pressed. Alexander raised his hand again, silencing the chamber. "The trial of Moon's truth is any wolf's right when their honor is questioned. If Elder Stern wishes to prove his innocence, the trial offers the most definitive path." Victor's eyes darted around the room, seeking allies. Finding none willing to speak openly, he straightened his aged frame. "I will not dignify these accusations with a response. The girl's mind has been warped by the corrupted Moonfire. She should be confined until we can determine the extent of the damage." Alexander's expression hardened. "That sounds remarkably like a refusal, Elder Stern." "Your Majesty," another council member interjected, "perhaps we should consider a more controlled investigation of these claims. The traditional unification ritual could provide clarity without risking further disruption." Morgan felt William's memories stir. The unification ritual, a formal ceremony where participants demonstrated their control over the power of the Moonfire. It had once been a celebration of their connection to the moon, but had been corrupted into a test of submission to council authority. "The unification ritual," Morgan said, addressing the council member. "Where exactly did that tradition begin? Do any of you actually know its true purpose?" Uncertainty flickered across several faces. Alexander watched the exchange intently, his amber eyes revealing nothing of his thoughts. "The ritual has been part of our traditions for generations," the council member replied. "It ensures harmony between individual wolves and the collective pack." "No," Morgan countered, drawing on William's memories. "It was originally a sharing of the Moonfire's gifts, a way for stronger wolves to help others connect to the moon's power. You've twisted it into a means of control." She turned to address the entire assembly. I will undergo your unification ritual, but in its true form. Not as a test of submission, but as a demonstration of what the Moonfire truly offers our kind. Victor's face contorted with fury. This is preposterous. Your Majesty, I implore you to end this farce before more damage is done. Alexander's gaze never left Morgan. Something unspoken passed between them, an understanding, perhaps even trust. The unification ritual will proceed at midnight, he declared. All council members will attend. His eyes shifted to Victor. All of them. The assembly was dismissed amid a hurricane of whispers and speculation. As guards escorted Morgan back to her quarters, no longer a cell but chambers befitting an honored guest, she caught Alexander watching her departure, his expression thoughtful. Alone in her new chambers, Morgan stood before a mirror, examining the silver patterns that still adorned her skin like luminous tattoos. They had faded somewhat but remained visible, a physical manifestation of the power William had helped her claim. William. Grief washed over her anew. Her uncle had sacrificed himself to give her the knowledge she needed to help her reclaim her birthright. She would not waste his gift. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. The door opened to reveal Alexander, who had exchanged his formal attire for simpler clothing. Without the crown and regalia, he appeared younger, less remote. You should be resting before the ritual, he said, remaining by the doorway. I doubt I could sleep if I tried, Morgan replied. Alexander stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. What happened in that chamber? I've never seen anything like it. Neither had I. Morgan turned away from the mirror. William gave his life to pass on what he knew. Generations of knowledge compressed into moments. And what does that knowledge tell you about me? Alexander asked, his tone carefully neutral. Morgan studied him, seeing him through the lens of William's memories. That you're caught between duty to your crown and duty to your conscience. That you've suspected the council's corruption, but lacked the proof to act. A flicker of surprise crossed his features. Your uncle saw more than I realized. He watched you grow up, Morgan said softly. He believed you were different from your father, that you might be the king who could help restore what was lost. Alexander moved to the window, gazing out at the castle grounds below. And what exactly was lost, Morgan Vale? What truth did your father die protecting? The question hung in the air between them. Morgan chose her words carefully, aware that even now they might be overheard. The true purpose of the Moonfire, she answered finally. It was never meant to be a tool for dominance or control. It was a gift, a connection between our kind and the moon that made us more than mere wolves or mere humans. She joined him at the window, keeping a respectful distance. The council feared its power because it couldn't be hoarded. In its true form, the Moonfire strengthens all wolves, equally making rigid hierarchies unnecessary. Alexander's jaw tightened. You're describing the end of the system that has governed our kind for centuries. I'm describing its beginning, Morgan corrected, before the corruption. Before wolves were divided into alphas and subordinates, rulers and ruled. Silence stretched between them. In the courtyard below, preparations for the midnight ritual had begun. Servants arranged ceremonial braziers in a wide circle, their movements precise and practiced. The unification ritual is dangerous, Alexander said finally, especially for one newly awakened to the Moonfire. If you lose control, I won't, Morgan stated with a certainty she didn't entirely feel. Alexander turned to face her fully. How can you be so sure? She met his gaze steadily. Because William didn't just give me knowledge. He gave me control, decades of discipline and practice compressed into instinct. And you trust this inherited control with your life? I have to, she replied simply. Too much depends on it. Alexander studied her for a long moment. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish. A small smile tugged at Morgan's lips. Perhaps both. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. Rest while you can. I'll have food sent up. He moved toward the door, then paused. Morgan? She waited. Whatever happens tonight, he said quietly, know that I want the truth, whatever it may be. After he departed, Morgan returned to the mirror. The silver patterns had faded further, retreating beneath her skin like sleeping embers waiting to be rekindled. But the knowledge William had sacrificed himself to provide remained vibrant in her mind, a tapestry of history, ritual, and power that had been her birthright all along. The hours passed slowly. Morgan ate the meal provided, knowing she would need her strength. As twilight descended over Silver Lake Castle, she felt a growing resonance with the rising moon, as though its light called to something within her blood. When the escorts arrived to bring her to the ritual grounds, Morgan was ready. The unification ritual was held in the central courtyard, now transformed by dozens of silver braziers arranged in concentric circles. Nobles and council members gathered on elevated platforms, while Alexander waited at the center, standing beside the largest brazier of all, a massive silver bowl filled with what appeared to be liquid moonlight. Morgan approached, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes following her progress. The white dress she still wore from the trial seemed to absorb the moonlight glowing softly in the darkness. Victor and the other council members occupied the closest platform to the central circle, their ages showing in the harsh ceremonial lighting. Victor's expression remained coldly hostile, though something like uncertainty flickered in his eyes when Morgan met his gaze directly. "The unification ritual begins," announced the same priest who had overseen the trial. "Morgan Vale will demonstrate her control over the power of the Moonfire, proving her worthiness to walk among us." Alexander stepped forward. "This ritual has traditionally been a test," he stated, his voice carrying to all assembled. "Tonight it will also be a revelation, an opportunity for all of us to witness the true nature of the power we call Moonfire." He extended his hand toward Morgan. "Are you prepared?" She nodded, taking his offered hand. His skin felt unnaturally warm against hers, almost feverish. The priest began chanting in the ancient language of wolves, words that resonated with the knowledge William had given her. Attendants approached the outer braziers, lighting them one by one. As each ignited, silver flames leaped upward, casting eerie shadows across the courtyard. Morgan felt the power building around her, an ancient primal energy that sang to something deep within her blood. The silver patterns beneath her skin began to resurface, glowing faintly in response to the ritual's energy. Alexander guided her to the central brazier. "Traditionally, I would command you to submit to the Moonfire's test," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "Instead, I ask you to show us its true nature if you can." Morgan looked into the brazier. The liquid moonlight swirled hypnotically, neither fully liquid nor gas, but something between states. Drawing upon William's memories, she understood what was required. She placed her hands above the swirling substance, feeling its energy reaching toward her like a living thing seeking connection. The silver patterns on her skin brightened in response, networks of luminous lines extending from her fingertips down her arms. "The Moonfire recognizes its own," she stated, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtyard. "It was never meant to bend us to another's will, but to connect us to our deepest nature." Taking a deep breath, Morgan plunged her hands into the liquid moonlight. Power surged through her, raw, electric, overwhelming. Her vision washed white, then fractured into kaleidoscopic images. Wolves running beneath a full moon, ancient rituals performed in forest clearings, generations of guardians protecting the sacred connection between wolves and moon. A distant part of her heard gasps from the assembled crowd. The Moonfire was climbing her arms, enveloping her body in shimmering silver light. For a terrifying moment, Morgan felt herself losing cohesion, her physical form becoming unstable as the power threatened to consume her. William's final gift came to her rescue. Deep within her consciousness, instincts not her own activated techniques for channeling, containing, directing the wild energy that threatened to tear her apart. Morgan seized these instincts, using them to assert control. The chaotic power began to organize, flowing through her in patterns rather than destructive surges. The pain receded, replaced by a strange exhilaration. When her vision cleared, Morgan saw that the Moonfire had completely enveloped her, transforming her into a being of pure silver light. Yet she remained in control, her consciousness intact within the radiance. The courtyard had fallen completely silent. Even the council members appeared stunned, Victor's face pale with what might have been fear. Alexander alone seemed unsurprised. He stood before her, calm amid the supernatural display. "This is the true face of the Moonfire," Morgan stated, her own voice resonating with otherworldly harmonics. "Not a curse, but a blessing. Not a tool of domination, but a gift of connection." She raised her hands and the silver fire responded, spiraling upward toward the moon overhead. For generations, the council has corrupted this gift, using it to maintain their power while denying its benefits to the rest of our kind. Victor rose from his seat, trembling with rage. "This is forbidden magic. She threatens everything we've built." "Everything you've stolen," Morgan countered. With a gesture, she sent tendrils of Moonfire toward the council platform. The silver light surrounded each elder, revealing their auras to all assembled. Most glowed with normal wolf energies, blues and greens predominating. But Victor and three others were surrounded by sickly shadows, their life forces unnaturally extended by consumed moonfire. "See how they've fed on what was meant for all," Morgan declared, "draining the moonfire to extend their lives, their influence, their control." The crowd's shock transformed into murmurs of anger and betrayal. Guards looked to Alexander for guidance, uncertain whether to intervene. Victor's composure cracked entirely. "Kill her!" he screamed, a dagger appearing suddenly in his hand. Before anyone could react, he hurled it directly at Morgan's heart. The silver fire surrounding her intercepted the blade, melting it midair. Morgan hadn't moved, hadn't needed to. Alexander's response was immediate. "Guards detain Elder Stern and his conspirators. They will face the trial of Moon's truth." As guards moved to comply, Victor's eyes blazed with desperate fury. "You fool," he spat at Alexander. "She'll destroy everything. The hierarchies that maintain order, the systems of control, all of it." "Perhaps they need to be destroyed," Alexander replied coldly, "if they were built on lies and theft." As Victor was dragged away, still shouting accusations and threats, the ceremonial braziers began to dim. The moonfire surrounding Morgan gradually receded, flowing back into her skin until only the faintest silver glow remained beneath the surface. She stood at the center of the courtyard, physically unchanged, yet fundamentally transformed. The knowledge and power that had been her birthright were now fully claimed. Alexander approached cautiously. "Are you still yourself?" Morgan nodded, suddenly exhausted. "The moonfire doesn't consume identity. It reveals it." He offered his support as her legs threatened to buckle. "You've shown tremendous control, but this is only the beginning of the challenges we face." Morgan leaned against him, allowing herself this moment of vulnerability. "Victor has allies beyond the council. They won't surrender their power without a fight." "I know," Alexander agreed grimly, "which is why we must prepare for war." As they left the ritual grounds, Morgan glanced up at the full moon overhead. For the first time in her life, she felt his pull, not as a threat, but as a birthright, a connection to something ancient and powerful that had chosen her bloodline as its guardians. William had given his life to help her reclaim this heritage. She would not waste his sacrifice. The Moonfire War was coming, and Morgan Vale, last of her line, would stand ready to face it alongside an alpha king who had chosen truth over tradition. Their alliance, forged in secrets and sacrifice, might be the only hope for a future where wolves could reclaim their true connection to the power that made them what they were. A month after the unification ritual, winter had descended fully upon the northern Cascades. The mountains stood like sentinels under a slate-gray sky, their peaks shrouded in mist that promised heavy snow before nightfall. The transformation in Morgan Vale was apparent to anyone who looked closely. The silver patterns that once only appeared when she channeled Moonfire had become permanent, delicate, luminous lines. Just beneath her skin, a visible reminder of William's sacrifice and the heritage she had reclaimed. From the eastern watchtower of Silver Lake Castle, Morgan observed Alexander's forces assembling in the valley below. Hundreds of wolves in human form moved with disciplined precision, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Each carried weapons, specially prepared according to Morgan's instructions. Silver-tipped spears, arrows coated with moonfire-ash shields, emblazoned with protective runes that glowed faintly in the dim morning light. Beautiful and terrible. Alexander's deep voice broke the silence as he joined her at the parapet. Morgan didn't turn, her eyes still fixed on the preparations below. The army or the coming war, both, he admitted, coming to stand beside her. The months since the unification ritual had changed him as well. The burden of kingship still rested on his shoulders, but there was a new certainty in his bearing, a quiet confidence that came from purpose rather than obligation. He wore battle armor of matte black with subtle silver accents, the metal polished but lacking ornamentation. No crown adorned his head, only the simple silver circlet of a war chief, practical rather than ceremonial. Victor's forces were spotted moving through Ravine Pass at dawn, Alexander said. General Thorne estimates they'll reach the valley by nightfall. Morgan nodded, unsurprised. After escaping during the chaos following the ritual, Victor Stern had fled to the Western Territories, where his influence remained strong. For weeks, Alexander's scouts had reported his growing forces, wolves recruited with promises of power, or threatened into compliance. The council's corruption had spread further than anyone realized. "He'll attack under the full moon," Morgan said with certainty. She touched the pendant at her throat, Alexander's mother's wolf talisman. "He believes it will give him advantage." "Will it?" She turned to face him directly, meeting the amber intensity of his gaze. "Only if we allow it." Their relationship had evolved beyond mere alliance over the past weeks. Not quite friendship, not quite something more, but a partnership forged in shared purpose and growing trust. Alexander had proven himself different from his father in ways that continued to surprise her. He listened when she spoke of the old ways, considered her counsel with genuine interest, and displayed none of the arrogance she had expected from the Alpha King. "The council awaits," Alexander said, offering his arm. Morgan accepted it, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. Together they descended the tower's spiral staircase toward the war room, where the remaining loyal council members and military commanders gathered around a large stone table. The chamber fell silent as they entered. All eyes followed their progress, noting the way Alexander guided Morgan to the seat at his right hand, a position traditionally reserved for the highest-ranking general or most trusted advisor. Some of the older council members still watched her with wary eyes, but most had witnessed her display during the unification ritual. They had seen the truth about the Moonfire, and that knowledge had shaken the foundations of their beliefs. "Report," Alexander commanded once they were seated. General Thorne stepped forward from the group. Silver-streaked hair framed a weathered face marked by a jagged scar that ran from temple to jaw, a remnant from the last great war between the clans. Despite his gruff exterior, he had been among the first to accept Morgan's teachings about the Moonfire, recognizing truth when he encountered it. "Victor's main force numbers approximately 800 wolves," Thorne reported, his finger tracing lines on the map spread across the table. "Our scouts confirm he's recruited mercenaries from the southern territories, including some with unusual abilities." "Blood magic practitioners," Morgan said, drawing surprised looks from those who hadn't been privy to earlier discussions. She felt William's memories providing context. His knowledge was incomplete before, but now he has access to forbidden texts from the Shadow Archives. He's been secretly training wolves in these dark arts for years. Murmurs spread through the room. Blood magic represented the darkest perversion of a wolf's natural connection to the moon power, drawn not from celestial energy, but from the suffering of others. It had been banned across all territories for generations. "Can they be countered?" Alexander asked, his expression grave. Morgan nodded. "With proper preparation, yes. But it will require using Moonfire in ways your people haven't seen in generations." Some council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Although the unification ritual had demonstrated Morgan's control over the Moonfire, old prejudices died hard. Many still viewed the power with suspicion, conditioned by centuries of misinformation and fear. "Whatever is necessary," Alexander declared, his tone silencing any potential objections. "Our survival depends on it." The meeting continued with strategies proposed and rejected, battle plans refined. Throughout, Morgan found herself drawing on William's memories, centuries of warfare and politics, compressed into instincts that felt foreign yet familiar. Her suggestions reflected not just theory, but the wisdom of countless conflicts witnessed through her ancestors' eyes. "The Moonfire warriors should be positioned here." She indicated a position on the map. "And here, they'll form a barrier against shadow-stepping attacks." "And the main force?" asked the commander. "Classic pincer movement," General Thorne suggested, "but we'll need to adapt when their shadow creatures emerge." As the council dispersed to their various duties, Alexander held Morgan back with a gentle touch to her arm. "Walk with me," he said quietly. They moved through the castle corridors in comfortable silence, eventually emerging into the private gardens. Despite winter's grip, some hardy plants still bloomed, their colors defiant against the gray sky. Frost coated the stone pathways, crunching beneath their boots as they walked. Alexander stopped beside an ancient oak, its bare branches reaching toward the heavens like supplicating arms. For a moment he simply stood there, his expression distant. "This was my mother's favorite spot," he said unexpectedly. "She would bring me here as a boy, tell me stories of the old times. Stories that I now realize contradicted much of what the council taught." Morgan listened, sensing the importance of this revelation. She had learned from William that Queen Alara had died young, officially from a wasting illness, though rumors suggested darker circumstances. She spoke of the Moonfire as a blessing, not a threat. Alexander continued, his breath visible in the cold air. She described a time when wolves lived in harmony with the power, when alphas served their packs rather than ruling them. He turned to face Morgan fully. I think she knew something of what your father discovered, and I think it may be why she died so young. The council, Morgan asked softly. Alexander's jaw tightened. I could never prove it, but yes, I believe so. Morgan absorbed this, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Why tell me this now? Because what happens tomorrow isn't just about defeating Victor. Alexander's eyes held hers intently. It's about what comes after. The kind of leadership our people need. Understanding dawned. You're planning to change everything. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I'm planning to restore what was lost, but I can't do it alone. The weight of his implied request hung between them. Before Morgan could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the main gates. Shouts echoed across the courtyard, guards running toward some disturbance. Without hesitation, they moved as one, racing toward the source of the chaos. As they rounded the corner, Morgan stopped abruptly, her breath catching in her throat. A small group of bedraggled wolves stood surrounded by guards, their clothes torn and dirty from hard travel. At their center, bleeding from multiple wounds but defiantly upright, stood Draven Reed, former general of Alexander's army, now Victor's most dangerous ally. Alexander drew a sword, anger flashing in his eyes. Draven! The wounded man raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, his face haggard but his eyes clear. I come with warning, Majesty, not threat. You betrayed your king and your oath, Alexander snarled. Give me one reason not to execute you where you stand. Draven's gaze shifted to Morgan, recognition and something like awe crossing his features as he noticed the silver patterns visible at her wrists. Because Victor has done the unthinkable. He's awakened something that should have remained buried. Morgan stepped forward, her instincts, both her own and William's, screaming danger. What has he done? He found the Shadow Stone. Draven replied, his voice hollow with exhaustion and fear. The dark counterpart to your Moonstone. With it, he plans to corrupt the Moonfire itself. A chill ran through Morgan that had nothing to do with the winter air. William's memory surged forward, images of ancient battles, of wolves twisted into monstrous forms, of skies turned blood red as the moon's light was poisoned. Impossible, one of the guards scoffed. The Shadow Stone is a myth. I wish it were, Draven said grimly. I watched him use it, watched it transform his closest followers into something wrong. Neither wolf nor human, but something else entirely. Something hungry. Alexander studied Draven carefully. Why turn against him now? You chose his side. I chose to support a challenger to what I believed was a flawed rule. Draven answered, meeting Alexander's gaze steadily. I did not choose to follow a madman into abomination. He gestured to the ragged wolves behind him. These are all that remain of those who tried to stop him. The rest are dead or changed. The tension in the courtyard was palpable. Guards tightened their grips on weapons, uncertain whether to trust this unexpected intelligence. Alexander looked to Morgan, his expression questioning. She nodded almost imperceptibly. Whatever Draven's past betrayals, the fear in his eyes now was genuine. Take him to the healers, Alexander ordered, then to secure quarters. Post guards, but treat him and his companions with dignity. As the guards moved to comply, he added, and summon the council immediately. The emergency council session was grim. Draven, wounds bandaged but still pale from blood loss, recounted what he had witnessed. Victor's discovery of the Shadow Stone in an ancient temple, the ritual that had bound it to his will, the horrifying transformations of his followers. They retain their intelligence, Draven explained, but lose their humanity. Their wolves become dominant, twisted by shadow magic. They're stronger, faster, and utterly loyal to Victor. How many? General Thorne demanded. Over 100 when I escaped. Possibly more now. Morgan felt William's memory stirring, providing context for this threat. The Shadow Wolves. She said, the term emerging from ancestral knowledge. The ancient texts called them Moonshadow. They can travel through darkness as if it were airbrush and become invisible in the night. Normal weapons barely slow them. Then how do we fight them? Alexander asked. Morgan met his gaze. With fire and silver, and with Moonfire properly wielded. Which means what exactly? One council member asked skeptically. It means I'll need to train some of your soldiers, Morgan replied. Those with the strongest connection to their wolves. I can show them how to access a fraction of the Moonfire's power enough to combat the shadow corruption. Alexander nodded decisively. Make it happen. General Thorne adjust our battle preparations accordingly. He turned to Draven. You'll provide every detail of Victor's forces' positions and plans. Draven inclined his head. Of course, Majesty. The meeting adjourned with a new sense of urgency. What had been a political conflict was now something far more dangerous, a threat to the very nature of their kind. As Morgan prepared to leave, Alexander caught her arm gently. A moment. When they were alone, his stoic facade cracked slightly, revealing genuine concern. This shadow stone, how great a threat is it, truly? Morgan chose her words carefully. If Victor fully masters it, he could corrupt the moonlight itself, turn what gives us our humanity into something that strips it away. And you believe you can counter it? I have to try. Morgan touched the faint silver markings on her skin. This power chose my bloodline, not just me. William saw it clearly. I was meant to face this threat. William's wisdom has proven reliable thus far, Alexander acknowledged, but even he would advise caution when facing the unknown. Morgan smiled faintly. A lesson he repeated often. The young rush in with fang and claw. The wise wait for the perfect moment to strike. Sound advice, Alexander said, then unexpectedly reached out and touched her cheek with surprising gentleness. Just be careful. We've only just found each other. The intimate gesture caught Morgan off guard, sending an unfamiliar warmth through her chest. Before she could respond, he turned and strode away, leaving her with swirling emotions and the weight of tomorrow's battle pressing down. The remainder of the day passed in intensive preparation. In the castle's largest courtyard, Morgan worked with a select group of Alexander's elite guards, teaching them to channel small amounts of Moonfire energy. Most struggled, their connection to the moon weakened by generations of the council's corrupted rituals. I can't do it, growled a young soldier, slamming his fist down in frustration after another failed attempt. Morgan looked at him, seeing a reflection of her younger self in his impatience. William taught me that power isn't a sudden flame, she said calmly. It's a patient ember. She knelt beside the soldier. Try again. Slower this time. Feel the connection, don't force it. When a tiny silver spark appeared in the soldier's palm, Morgan smiled. That's the first lesson my old mentor taught me. Patience isn't slowness. It's precision. By evening, several soldiers had shown promise, their eyes glowing silver as they accessed the ancient power. It wouldn't be enough against Victor's full force, but it was a beginning. As twilight approached, Morgan retreated to her chambers to prepare herself. The ritual required solitude and focus. She arranged silver bowls of water around the room, each reflecting the emerging moonlight as clouds parted overhead. Then she began the chant William had passed to her, words in an ancient language that resonated with the power in her blood. The silver markings on her skin brightened, spreading further across her body in intricate patterns. She felt the moonfire responding, flowing through her veins like liquid light. Unlike the chaotic surge during the unification ritual, this was controlled, purposeful, a weapon being honed. A soft knock interrupted her concentration. Enter, she called, expecting a messenger with news of the enemy's approach. Instead, Alexander stood in the doorway, his expression solemn. He had changed into full battle regalia, black armor, with silver wolf emblems, a cloak of midnight blue draped over his shoulders. Without his crown or the trappings of court, he looked more warrior than king. Our scouts report Victor's forces will arrive within the hour, he said. They move faster than expected. Morgan nodded, continuing her preparations. The Shadow Wolves can cover ground at unnatural speed. They're probably scouting ahead. Alexander watched her work, his gaze taking in the ritual components and the glowing sigils on her skin. Will you be ready? I will. She met his eyes. But you should know, what I'm planning is dangerous. Not just to me, but potentially to everyone. The Moonfire is powerful but unpredictable, especially when opposed by shadow magic. He moved further into the room, stopping within arm's reach. Is there another way? We could retreat, Morgan said honestly. Try to outrun them, find allies in distant territories. And how many would die while we ran? Alexander asked, though his tone suggested he already knew her answer. Morgan smiled faintly. William would say that sometimes wisdom means recognizing when retreat merely postpones inevitable confrontation. Some fights can't be avoided. Silence stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotions. Finally, Alexander reached into his cloak and withdrew a small object wrapped in silk. "I wanted you to have this," he said, extending it towards her. "For luck, or protection, or whatever you wish to call it." Morgan unwrapped the silk carefully. Inside lay a pendant of extraordinary craftsmanship, a silver wolf with tiny moonstones for eyes suspended on a delicate chain. "It was my mother's," Alexander explained. "She told me to give it to someone who truly understood the old ways. I think she would have wanted you to have it." Deeply touched, Morgan lifted the pendant, feeling a subtle resonance with her own power. "It's beautiful. Thank you." Alexander took it gently from her hands, moving behind her to fasten it around her neck. His fingers brushed her skin, sending an electric sensation down her spine. "There," he said softly, his breath warm against her ear. "Now you carry a piece of my family's protection as I carry yours." Morgan turned to face him, their bodies close in the dim light. "My protection." His hand rose to touch his chest, where she now noticed a small pouch hung from a cord beneath his armor. "A pinch of Moonfire ash from your ritual. I hope you don't mind. One of the servants saved it for me." A surge of emotion caught Morgan by surprise. Concern for his safety mingled with something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name. On impulse, she reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "Be careful out there," she whispered. Alexander caught her hand in his, pressing it more firmly against his cheek. "I have much to live for now." The moment hung suspended between them, possibilities shimmering in the air. Then a horn sounded in the distance, 3 short blasts followed by a long tone. The enemy had been sighted. Reality crashed back. They separated, both assuming the composed demeanor that leadership demanded. No more words were needed. With a final nod of understanding, Alexander turned and strode from the room, his cloak billowing behind him like a shadow given form. Morgan returned to her preparations with renewed determination. As she completed the final elements of the ritual, she felt the moonfire within her burning brighter than ever before, responding to both the threat and her own emotions. By the time she emerged onto the castle battlements, the first wave of Victor's forces was visible at the edge of the valley, dark shapes moving with unnatural speed through the evening shadows. Above them, the full moon rose enormous and luminous, bathing the landscape in silver light. Alexander stood with his generals, issuing final orders as troops moved into defensive positions. He acknowledged Morgan with a respectful nod as she joined them. "Victor's main force remains behind that ridge," General Thorne reported, pointing to a distant elevation. "But the Shadow Wolves are already probing our defenses." As if summoned by his words, unearthly howls echoed across the valley. Not the familiar calls of normal wolves, but something distorted and wrong, like screams filtered through broken glass. "They're trying to intimidate us," Alexander said calmly. "Stand firm." Morgan moved to the edge of the battlement, feeling the moonfire responding to the approaching corruption. The silver markings on her skin glowed brighter, visible even through her clothing. "They'll attack from multiple directions," she said, sensing rather than seeing the enemy's movements. "The shadows are their pathways." Alexander gave orders to reinforce vulnerable positions. Soldiers carrying the specially prepared weapons, silver-tipped spears and arrows soaked in the mixture Morgan had created from moonfire ash, moved into place. The wait was agonizingly brief. The first shadow wolf appeared literally from darkness, stepping out of a deep shadow masked by the outer wall, as if emerging from a doorway. It resembled a wolf in basic form, but wrong in every detail. Too large, its proportions distorted its fur, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Its eyes glowed red, and shadows seemed to cling to it like smoke. A guard shouted warning, leveling his silver-tipped spear. The creature moved with blinding speed, eviscerating him before he could strike. More appeared, materializing from shadows across the courtyard, sowing chaos and confusion. "They're inside the perimeter," General Thorne shouted. Alexander drew his sword, a magnificent blade etched with ancient runes that glowed faintly blue in the moonlight. "Hold the inner bailey. Don't let them reach the keep." Morgan felt the moment had come. She raised her hands toward the moon, calling upon the power that coursed through her veins. Silver light erupted from her palms, spiraling upward to form a protective dome over the central castle. "The keep is secure," she called to Alexander. "They can't shadow step through moonfire." He nodded acknowledgement, already moving toward the stairs that would take him to the main battle. Morgan wanted to follow to fight at his side, but her current task required absolute concentration. Maintaining the moonfire shield while extending protection to the troops below, demanded every ounce of her focus. From her elevated position, Morgan watched the battle unfold with growing horror. The Shadow Wolves were devastating, tearing through conventional defenses with contemptuous ease. Only the specially prepared weapons showed any effect, causing the creatures to howl in pain when struck. The soldiers Morgan had trained were making a difference, small bursts of silver fire erupting wherever they engaged the enemy. But they were too few, spread too thin across the battleground. Alexander fought like a demon at the front lines, his enchanted sword cleaving through shadow wolves with remarkable effectiveness. His personal guard formed a tight formation around him, protecting their king, while advancing steadily toward the ridge where Victor's main forces waited. Hours passed in desperate combat. Morgan maintained the protective shield while reaching out with tendrils of Moonfire to assist where possible, but the strain was beginning to tell. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her hands trembling with effort. Then at the darkest hour of night, Victor himself appeared. He stood atop the distant ridge, illuminated by an unnatural purple-black light that seemed to bend the moonbeams around him. Even from a distance, Morgan could see how he had changed, his form, elongated and twisted, halfway between human and monstrous wolf, the shadowstone pulsing at his throat like a grotesque heartbeat. Alexander Blackwood, his voice carried unnaturally across the battlefield. See how your kingdom falls, how your precious order crumbles. Morgan felt a surge of dark energy as Victor raised his hands. The shadowstone flared, sending a pulse of corrupted power washing across the valley. Where it touched, shadows deepened and twisted, forming new pathways for his creatures. A fresh wave of shadow wolves poured from these openings, overwhelming defensive positions that had held until now. The tide of battle shifted dangerously. Morgan made her decision in an instant. She couldn't maintain the shield and counter Victor's power simultaneously. Alexander and his forces would have to protect the keep. The younger me would have tried to do both, she whispered to herself, hearing William's voice in her memory. But wisdom means recognizing your limitations. Gathering the Moonfire into a concentrated sphere between her palms, Morgan directed all her will toward Victor. The silver light shot across the battlefield like a comet aimed directly at the Shadowstone. Victor sensed the attack coming. He raised a barrier of shadow energy, deflecting Morgan's assault. The collision of opposing forces created a shockwave that knocked combatants from both sides off their feet. For a moment, the fighting paused as all eyes turned to the spectacular display of power above the battlefield. Morgan felt Victor's attention focus on her, his corrupted consciousness brushing against her mind like ice against bare skin. The last Vale, his voice slithered through her thoughts. How fitting you should witness the end of the old ways. Morgan reinforced her mental barriers, pushing him out. These aren't the old ways, she projected back. This is perversion. Victor's laughter echoed across the valley. This is evolution. He gathered shadow energy for another attack, this one aimed directly at her. Morgan braced herself, drawing upon her deepest reserves to counter it. The impact was devastating. Dark energy collided with silver light, creating a vortex of competing power that spiraled upward into the night sky. Morgan felt her consciousness being pulled into the maelstrom, her identity beginning to fragment under the assault. William's final gift came to her rescue once more. Deep in her mind, ancestral knowledge activated, showing her a technique to ground herself against such attacks. Morgan visualized roots extending from her body deep into the earth, anchoring her essence against the spiritual onslaught. The young fight with fury, she heard William's voice in memory. The wise fight with foundation. The pressure eased. Morgan reasserted control, pushing back against Victor's attack. Their powers reached stalemate, neither able to overcome the other. Below, the battle had resumed with renewed ferocity. Alexander and his elite guard had fought their way almost to the base of Victor's ridge, leaving a trail of defeated shadow wolves behind them. Victor noticed their approach. With a snarl of frustration, he broke off his attack against Morgan, redirecting his power toward the advancing threat. Shadow energy coalesced into a massive wave that swept down the hillside. "Alexander, look out!" Morgan cried, though she knew he couldn't possibly hear her across the distance. Somehow he sensed the danger. Alexander raised his sword high, the runes blazing with blue fire. When the shadow wave struck, the blade seemed to absorb and disperse the energy, protecting those nearby. Morgan seized the opportunity of Victor's divided attention. Drawing upon the moonlight that bathed the valley, she channeled it into a focused beam aimed at the Shadowstone. This time, with Victor distracted by Alexander's advance, her attack struck true. The Shadow Stone cracked a jagged fissure appearing across its surface. Victor screamed in rage and pain, the corrupted bond between him and the artifact, sending feedback through his transformed body. Shadow wolves across the battlefield faltered as their master's control wavered. Alexander pressed the advantage, leading his forces up the ridge in a determined charge. Victor, wounded but still dangerous, retreated toward his main army. The Shadow Wolves regrouped around him, forming a protective barrier. The battle reached momentary impasse. Morgan sensed opportunity. Victor's connection to the Shadowstone had been weakened. With one concentrated effort, she might be able to destroy it completely. But such an attempt would require channeling more Moonfire than she had ever dared. The risk to herself was enormous. As she hesitated, her gaze found Alexander on the battlefield below. Their eyes met across the distance, some unspoken communication passing between them. He nodded once, understanding in his expression. Morgan thought of William's final lesson, that sometimes the greatest wisdom lies in knowing when to take the ultimate risk. She made her choice. Releasing the protective shield around the keep, she gathered all her power for a single devastating strike. The silver markings on her skin blazed like starlight, spreading to cover her entire body. Her feet lifted slightly from the battlements as the moonfire surrounded her in a corona of brilliant energy. Victor sensed the building attack. He raised both hands, channeling all the Shadowstone's remaining power into a defensive barrier. When Morgan released her assault, the entire valley illuminated as if day had broken. A column of pure silver light descended from the heavens, focused through her body, and directed at Victor and the Shadowstone. The impact was cataclysmic. Victor's barrier shattered. The Shadowstone exploded in a shower of dark fragments. The backlash of energy sent both Morgan and Victor flying backward. Morgan crashed against the battlement wall, the breath knocked from her lungs. Through blurring vision, she saw Victor's form contorting as the shadow magic lost coherence. The unnatural transformations beginning to unravel without the stone's power to sustain them. The shadow wolves across the battlefield howled in agony as their corrupted forms destabilized. Some collapsed into ordinary wolves, unconscious but alive. Others dissolved into shadow and vanished. Alexander seized the moment of confusion. With his elite guard, he charged the remaining distance to Victor's position. Morgan struggled to her feet, the moonfire within her dangerously depleted. She had given nearly everything in that final attack, leaving barely enough energy to maintain consciousness. But she had to know the outcome. Through the case of the disintegrating shadow forces, she watched Alexander confront Victor. The elder wolf had reverted to mostly human form, though shadows still clung to him like tattered remnants of the power he'd wielded. He held a conventional blade, now facing Alexander with hatred burning in his eyes. "You destroy everything our kind has built," Victor spat. "Centuries of order of strength." "We're building something better," Alexander replied calmly. "Something true to what we were meant to be." Victor attacked with the desperate fury of a cornered animal. Alexander parried their blades, ringing in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the battlefield. Despite his age, Victor fought with cunning and experience, scoring a glancing blow across Alexander's arm. But the outcome was inevitable. Alexander had youth strength and righteousness on his side. With a decisive move, he disarmed Victor, sending the elder wolf's blade spinning away into the darkness. Victor fell to his knees, glaring up at his conqueror. "Finish it then. Prove you are no different from your father." Alexander lowered his sword. "I am nothing like my father, and you will face justice, not execution without trial." As he turned to give orders to his guards, Victor revealed one final deception. From his sleeve slid a small dagger, its blade black as night. With hatred contorting his features, he lunged at Alexander's unprotected back. "Alexander!" Morgan screamed, her voice lost in the distance. But Draven, fighting alongside his former king to redeem himself, saw the attack coming. He threw himself between Victor and Alexander, taking the poisoned blade in his own chest. Alexander whirled at the commotion, his expression shifting from confusion to rage as he understood what had happened. This time he didn't hesitate. His sword swept in a gleaming arc, separating Victor's head from his shoulders in one clean stroke. As Victor's body collapsed, a strange phenomenon began. The lingering shadow magic that had infused his being escaped like smoke, rising toward the moon before dissipating in the silver light. Across the battlefield, the remaining shadow wolves reverted fully to their natural states. The corruption cleansed from their bodies. The battle was over. They had won. Morgan sagged against the battlement wall, exhaustion overwhelming her. The silver markings on her skin had faded to barely visible traces, her connection to the Moonfire reduced to the faintest whisper. She wasn't sure how much time passed before she heard footsteps on the stone stairs. Looking up with effort, she saw Alexander approaching, his armor damaged and bloodied, but his stride sure. Without words, he gathered her into his arms, holding her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. Morgan leaned into his strength, allowing herself this moment of vulnerability. "It's over," Alexander murmured against her hair. "You did it." "We did it," she corrected softly. "How many did we lose?" His embrace tightened slightly. "Too many, but far fewer than we might have without your power." Morgan nodded against his chest. "And Draven, alive barely. The healers are with him now." Alexander pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "He saved my life. Whatever his past betrayals, that debt can never be repaid." "People can surprise you," Morgan said, thinking of her own journey from hunted fugitive to whatever she was now. "William taught me that judgment without wisdom is just prejudice in disguise." Alexander smiled faintly. "Your mentor was a wise man indeed." As dawn broke over the battlefield, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, they stood together on the battlement, watching the new day emerge. The surviving soldiers were gathering their wounded, treating enemies with the same care as allies. The shadow corruption had left many of Victor's followers confused and disoriented, with little memory of their actions. "What happens now?" Morgan asked quietly. Alexander's arm remained around her shoulders, supporting her depleted strength. "We rebuild. We heal. We change what needs changing. The council won't make that easy." "The council will be reformed," Alexander stated with quiet determination. Too many of them were compromised by Victor's influence, whether they knew it or not. "It's time for new voices, new perspectives." He looked down at her. "Including yours if you're willing." Morgan considered this the implication of a permanent place at Alexander's side. And the Moonfire, the old ways. Restored gradually, under proper guidance. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "Your guidance, Orthon," the weight of responsibility pressed against her exhaustion. "I've learned so much from William, but I'm not sure I'm ready for that." "Neither was I ready to be king," Alexander admitted. "But as your William might have said, sometimes the role finds us, rather than us seeking it." Morgan nodded, understanding the truth in his words. William had believed she was meant for this purpose, to help restore the true connection between wolves and moon, to guide their kind back to balance. "I now understand what William always tried to teach me," she said softly. "True power isn't about possessing strength, but about transmitting it." Alexander nodded. "That's why the old councils failed. They hoarded rather than shared." "And we'll do differently," Morgan affirmed. "Each generation building upon the foundation of the one before, not denying it. Every voice valued, young and old alike." She looked into his eyes. "That will be William Rivers' true legacy, a world where wisdom is treasured as a gift, not a tool of control." The pendant Alexander had given her caught the morning light gleaming against her skin. She touched it thoughtfully, feeling the subtle resonance with her own diminished power. It would return in time, she knew, the Moonfire replenishing itself with each full moon. "One step at a time," she said finally, "beginning with healing and rest." Alexander smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually solemn features. "Wise counsel as always." As they turned to descend from the battlements, Alexander paused, still holding her hand. "Morgan," she waited, sensing the importance of what he wished to say. "When I found you at the Moonfall ball, I thought I'd discovered a threat to my kingdom." His expression softened. "Instead, I found its heart." The simple declaration touched something deep within her, a place that had been closed since her father's execution. Morgan felt walls crumbling, defenses yielding to something more powerful than fear or caution. "And I found a king worth serving," she replied softly. "Worth believing in." Alexander's free hand rose to touch her cheek, his callous thumb tracing the curve of her jawline. "Is that all you found?" Morgan's heart quickened. In that moment, she acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding, that her feelings for Alexander had grown far beyond political alliance or shared purpose. "No," she whispered, "not all." The kiss that followed was gentle yet profound, a promise exchanged without words. When they separated, something fundamental had shifted between them, a new beginning, emerging from the ashes of conflict. Behind them, the battlefield lay quiet under the morning sun. Before them stretched a future uncertain but full of possibility. And above the fading moon watched over it all, its ancient light, a reminder of the power that had shaped their kind since the beginning, a power no longer feared but embraced. Morgan Vale, last of her line, had found her place at last. Not as a hunted fugitive, not as a weapon of war, but as a bridge between past and future, a guardian of the true ways walking beside a king who dared to change what generations had accepted as immutable. As they descended into the castle toward the work of healing that awaited them both, Morgan felt William's presence one final time not as memory or ghost, but as legacy. His wisdom lived on through her just as her father's courage had lived on through him. The chain remained unbroken, connecting all who came before to all who would follow. To wisdom, she whispered too quietly for Alexander to hear. And somewhere, perhaps in the silver light of the fading moon, she felt an answer. To wisdom indeed.